Hello everyone, welcome to DevOps HQ. In this video, we are going to see that how we can set up a HAProxy load balancer on the top of Google Cloud using compute instances. So before going into the practical, first of all, let's understand the architecture. So this will gonna our architecture in which we will have a HAProxy load balancer whose endpoint should be reachable to all these end users, and when they hit to this load balancer IP, then this load balancer will route our request to our backend services depending upon the load or the algorithm which we are provided to this HAProxy. So for this practical, we will gonna use the round robin technique, such that when requests come to this load balancer, it will route the first request to server A, then the other request to server B, and the next request to server C. And again, the next request which will come to this load balancer, it will go to the server A, then server B, and then server C. So this is how our load balancer will gonna work. So now let's start with the practical. So let's go to our console, and here just go to compute instances. And for this practical, as we have seen in this diagram, we will create 3 web servers for our backend and 1 server for our load balancer. So let's name it as web1, and for this tutorial we will gonna use Ubuntu instead of Debian. And make sure to allow the HTTP and HTTPS traffic. And now we have to create 2 more. Change its boot disk to Ubuntu, then allow the traffic, click on create, and 1 more instance. Change the boot, allow the traffics. So these 3 will be our web server, and we need 1 more instance for our load balancer. So let's name it as HAProxy load balancer, and we will again use the same Ubuntu image, then allow the traffics, and then click on create. So we have launched our compute instances, and now we have to configure our web server. So for that, click on SSH here for all these 3 instances, and let's configure the web servers. So we got the terminal. Let's be sudo, and now we have to install our packages. apt install Apache 2. Okay, let's install. Same setup we have to do in other instances as well. So for that, here also we have to run the same command, apt install Apache 2. Let's copy this command here and run this. Now on our third web server, we have to run the same thing. So sudo install the web server here. So we have configured our web server on all these 3 instances, and let's see that if we are able to see our web pages or not. Okay, so it's running fine, and we can see that we are getting the response. So now we have to replace the default website to our custom website, such that we will able to see that our requests are going to different instances. And for that, I have already created a website for this tutorial, and we will gonna use that. So I will copy this website. It's basically a simple HTML file, and we have to replace this default website. So for that, let's do vim /var/dev/html index.html. So we have to delete this content. For that, type d1000d, which will delete all its so remove all these lines and paste it the website which we have copied here. Press escape and :wq to save it. Now we have to do the same thing in other instances as well. So just press vim/var/dev/html index.html, delete all these lines and here paste the code, and don't forget to replace this number such that we will able to see that the request is coming from server 1, server 2 or server 3. So earlier, like in this instance, we have already pasted as server 1. So here we'll replace this one with 2 and then save this file. So for that, press escape :wq. And now let's do the same thing in our server 3 as well. So remove all this. vim/var/dev/html. Okay, I mistaken. We have to update the index.html. Remove all these contents and then paste our code and replace this one with 3. Save this file. So now we have configured our web server with our custom website. So if we go to our architecture diagram here, so now we have configured our web server on these compute instances. So we have now 3 web servers, and if we can copy this its public IP and open it in a new tab, then we can see that this is server 1. Let's copy this. This is server 2 and this one, the third one. So we are getting error here because the protocol which it is using is HTTPS, and our web server is configured on HTTP. That's why we are getting this error. And if we just remove this S from the protocol and make it HTTP and hit enter, so we can see that our web server is coming. So these are our 3 web servers. And now let's configure our load balancer such that we don't have to know these 3 IPs, that the first one, the second, and these 3 IPs, and we just know our load balancer IP, and it will redirect that traffic to these backend servers depending upon the load. So let's SSH into this. So it's open. Now let's become sudo. First of all, we have to install the HAProxy. So for that, type apt install HAProxy space -y. So now our HAProxy load balancer has installed, and now we have to make some changes into its configuration such that this load balancer will know that when any request come to this endpoint or to this machine, then on which machines or on which servers it has to redirect their request. So for that, let's go inside the HAProxy directory, that is /etc/HAProxy, enter. So here we can see that we have this configuration file. So before making any changes into a configuration file, it's a best or good practice to keep a backup of this configuration file such that in future if anything went wrong, we will simply replace that our current configuration file from the previous one and it will gonna work. So let's make a copy of this. So move HAProxy config to HAProxy backup.cfg now. So we have changed this HAProxy config to our HAProxy backup config, such that if anything will not work in future, then we can roll back. And now let's create another file with this name of HAProxy config, and here we have to define some rules. So first of all, the first thing is defaults, and in default we have to define the mode, that is which we are gonna use. So in this practical we will using HTTP, so that's why I have defined the mode as HTTP. Then we have to define some timeout, that is timeout client of 10 seconds. Then another timeout for connect is 5 seconds. Then timeout server 10 seconds, and then timeout for HTTP request, it should be 10 seconds. So timeout. So these are some basic timeouts which we have to define in our load balancer, such that it will be not taking a connection or not keeping a connection for too long. So here we can see that the client connection should be like we have defined as 10 seconds, so it won't retain a connection more than 10 seconds. If it is crosses the 10 seconds, then it will drop those requests, such that our load balancer will not get overloaded with, such that our web server will not get overloaded. And after defining these rules, we have to set up our front end. So front end basically means to which our request will came here. So if I go to all the architecture diagram, so here we can see that this should be our front end. So in our case, like we don't have a separate website or a separate server which we're gonna use as a front end. In our case, the HAProxy itself is the front end. So that's why like here we have defining the front end. So we have to give a name to our front end. So let's name it as HQ front end, and here we have to define the details. So we have to bind our port 80 because it's the common port which is used by HTTP. So that's why like we are binding the port number 80, and we again defining the mode, that is HTTP, and then we have to define the our backend servers. So for that we have to type default backend, and then we have to give a name. So let's name it as DevOps HQ, and then after defining the front end, we have to define our backend. So again the syntax is same, that is we have to type backend, and then we have to give a name to our backend. So as here like we have already given the name DevOps HQ, so just paste it here, and then we have to define the load balancer technique. So for that we have to type balance, and then we have to give the name of our technique. So we can use the technique called round robin, or we can use the technique which is least connection. So there are multiple algorithms supported by HAProxy which you can read from the official documentation of HAProxy website for more details. And in this practical we will gonna use the technique of round robin. So let's define the server now. So for that we have to type server, then this will be our server 1, and here we have to paste the IPs of our web servers. So let's copy this IP, paste it here, and define the port, that is 80. So let's suppose if in your case the web server is running on some another port, let's suppose for port number 3000 or 4000, then you can define the data specific port number here, such that it will try to connect on data specific port. Now let's define our another server. So let's name it as server 2, and then copy the another IP address, and let's give the port number 80. Although if we don't define the port number 80 here, then also it will work, because this is a default port number on which the request will go. And now let's copy the last IP server 3, port number 80. So we have defined the basic things which we required for our practical. Now let's save it. So for that, press escape, then :wq and hit enter. HAProxy service. So for that, we have to type systemctl start HAProxy and hit enter. That's systemctl, and let's see the status of this. So it's running. So now let's copy the IP address of this HAProxy load balancer and try to open this. Let's restart our service once and see that if we are able to connect. Systemctl restart HAProxy. Let's try to connect. Okay. So we have to restart our HAProxy service after changing the configurations. So now if we can see that this request is coming from the server 3, and now if we again refresh this page, then we can see that this web page is coming from our server 2, and if we again refresh, it's 3, then 2, then 1. So we have successfully set up our HAProxy load balancer on the top of Google Cloud. And as a homework or as a task, you have to deploy the same setup on the top of AWS. And in case if you face any issue or any challenges, then feel free to reach out to us through our Telegram channel or through the comment section, and we will try to help you as soon as possible. And thanks for watching.